All right, this is the copyright disclaimer. The copyright disclaimer under Section 107 of the Copyright Act of 1976. Allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, education, and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Fair use, fair use, fair use.
Let me be clear about something right from the start. What just happened in Israel is not a military setback. It is not a tactical miscalculation. It is not something that spin doctors in Tel Aviv or Washington can paper over with carefully worded press releases and breathless commentary from analysts who have never once set foot in a war zone. What Iran just did, striking the very nerve center of the Israel Defense Forces, killing senior generals inside what was supposed to be one of the most protected command structures on the planet, is a seismic, civilization altering event. And the mainstream media, as usual, is doing everything in its power to make sure you don't understand what it actually means. But I was there. I have sat in those intelligence briefings. I have watched empires convince themselves of their own invincibility right up until the moment the walls came down around them. And I am telling you now, the walls are coming down. Having served in military intelligence and having spent years watching how the IDF operates, how it projects power, how it constructs the mythology of its own invulnerability, I can tell you with absolute certainty that this strike is Benjamin Netanyahu's worst nightmare made real. Not because of the body count alone, though killing dozens of top-tier generals in a single strike is operationally catastrophic by any measure. No, the nightmare runs deeper than that. Because what Iran has just demonstrated in the most visceral and undeniable terms possible is that the IDF's command and control infrastructure, the brain of the entire Israeli military machine, is not safe. It has never been safe. And every deterrence calculation that Israel has built its strategic posture on for the last several decades just got incinerated along with those generals. The reality is that the Israeli Defense Forces has spent the better part of 70 years cultivating an image of omnipotence, an image of technological superiority so overwhelming that no adversary in the region would ever dare to reach out and touch the core of Israeli military power directly. That image is now ash. And what replaces it, what fills the vacuum left behind when a myth this powerful is destroyed, is something far more dangerous, far more unpredictable, and far more consequential for every single person watching this right now, whether you live in Tel Aviv, Tehran, Washington, or anywhere else on this planet. Let me walk you through exactly what happened, because the details matter enormously, and the details are precisely what the media is burying under an avalanche of vague language and carefully managed outrage. The IDF's General Staff Headquarters is not simply an office building. Having been inside equivalent command structures during my time in military service, I can tell you that these facilities are engineered to survive. They are hardened. They are compartmentalized. They are surrounded by layered defensive systems, electronic countermeasures, air defense batteries, rapid reaction forces. The entire architecture of such a facility is built around one fundamental premise. The people inside it are irreplaceable, and therefore protecting them is a non-negotiable strategic imperative. When Iran penetrated that architecture, when Iranian missiles or drones or whatever precise combination of systems they deployed found their way through all of those layers and delivered lethal, devastating force directly onto the heads of Israel's senior military leadership, That was not luck. That was not a fortunate accident. That was the product of years of painstaking intelligence work, precision targeting development, and an operational sophistication that the West has been systematically and dangerously underestimating for the better part of 2 decades. And here is what you need to understand about what that means strategically, because this is where the story goes from shocking to genuinely terrifying. Stay with me. In my time as a weapons inspector and as an intelligence officer, I learned one thing above all others. The most dangerous moment in any conflict is not when one side is winning. The most dangerous moment is when a side that believed itself to be invincible suddenly discovers that it is not. Because that is when rational calculation goes out the window. That is when leaders who have built their entire political identity on strength, on toughness, on the projection of absolute resolve, find themselves staring into an abyss they never believed could exist. And right now, Benjamin Netanyahu is staring into that abyss. He is looking at the bodies of his generals. He is looking at a command structure that has been decapitated, not metaphorically, not symbolically, but literally and physically. And the question that every serious analyst, every person with real intelligence experience, every individual who has ever watched a cornered leader make decisions under conditions of existential panic needs to be asking right now is this: what does Netanyahu do next? Because I can promise you, whatever it is, it will not be calm. It will not be measured, and it will not make the situation better. What the mainstream media won't tell you is the full operational context of this strike and what it reveals about the dramatic, fundamental shift in the military balance of power across the entire Middle East. Because this strike does not exist in isolation. It is the culmination, or perhaps more accurately, a critical escalatory chapter in a conflict that has been building with terrible, inexorable momentum for years. The war that was supposedly about Gaza, supposedly about October 7th, supposedly about Iran's nuclear program, has metastasized into something far larger, far more structurally significant, and far more dangerous to global stability than any of the carefully managed narratives being fed to the public through Western media channels have been willing to acknowledge. Let me give you the real picture. Having followed Iranian military development closely, having analyzed their doctrine, their investments, their strategic thinking over many years, I can tell you that what we are witnessing is the result of a deliberate, systematic, and extraordinarily disciplined Iranian strategic program that was designed from the ground up to do exactly what it is now doing. Iran looked at American and Israeli military power, they studied it, they identified the seams, the gaps, the vulnerabilities, and rather than trying to match the West dollar for dollar, which they could never do, they found an entirely different approach. They built a military capability specifically engineered to neutralize the advantages that America and Israel had spent trillions of dollars developing. Precision long-range strike systems, drone warfare at industrial scale, layered anti-access and area denial capabilities that make the Persian Gulf an extraordinarily dangerous operating environment for American naval power. And now, demonstrably, the ability to reach inside hardened command infrastructure and eliminate senior military leadership. Think about what that means for a moment. Israel has the most sophisticated air defense system in the world, the Iron Dome, David's Sling, the Arrow system. Billions upon billions of dollars invested in creating an impenetrable defensive umbrella over Israeli territory and Israeli military facilities. And Iran just proved that umbrella has holes, large ones. And the people who fell through those holes were the generals that Netanyahu relied upon to execute his military strategy. This is not a footnote. This is not a tactical development. This is a strategic catastrophe of the first order. And if you thought the Israeli response to the Hamas attack on October 7th was disproportionate, uncontrolled, and reckless, then you haven't begun to imagine what a Netanyahu who has just watched his generals die inside his own military headquarters is capable of ordering. But if you thought that was bad, stay with me, because what I'm about to lay out next will fundamentally reshape how you understand everything that is happening in this region and everything that is coming. The context here goes back further than most people realize, and it requires an honest accounting of the decisions, the catastrophically bad decisions that brought us to this point. Having been in the room, having participated in the intelligence processes that informed American and Israeli strategic thinking during multiple administrations, I know exactly how the groupthink operated. I know exactly how dissenting voices were marginalized, how inconvenient intelligence was reframed, how worst-case scenarios were dismissed as the paranoid concerns of analysts who didn't understand the big picture. The big picture, as it was presented by the architects of American Middle East policy, was straightforward. American military and economic dominance combined with Israeli military superiority would permanently shape the regional order in ways favorable to Washington and Tel Aviv. Iran would either submit or be destroyed, and no one in the region had the capability, the will, or the strategic depth to challenge that order in any fundamental way. That assessment was wrong. It was wrong when it was first articulated. It was wrong through every subsequent administration that repeated it as gospel. And it is catastrophically, demonstrably, undeniably wrong today, as we look at the bodies of Israeli generals killed inside what should have been the most protected military facility in the country. The reality is, and this is something I have been saying for years, long before it became impossible to ignore, Iran never needed to match American or Israeli power conventionally. They never needed aircraft carriers. They never needed fifth-generation stealth fighters. They never needed the kind of massive, expensive, logistically complex military infrastructure that America has spent its entire post-World War II history building and maintaining. What Iran needed was the ability to make the cost of attacking them prohibitive, the ability to hold American power projection at risk in the Persian Gulf, the ability to strike back with precision and lethality at any adversary that chose to bring war to their doorstep. And they built exactly that for roughly 1%. Let me say that again, 1% of what the United States spends annually on national defense. 1%. Take a moment and let that sink in, because that number tells you everything you need to know about the fundamental bankruptcy of the strategic thinking that has governed American and Israeli military policy in this region. We spent trillions, they spent billions, and they achieved the strategic outcome they were seeking, the ability to survive, to resist, and, as we are now witnessing, the ability to strike back with devastating effect at the very heart of Israeli military power. Now, I want to address something directly, because I know there are people watching this who are going to say, who have already been told to say, that this strike changes nothing, that Israel will recover, that Netanyahu will reconstitute his command structure, absorb the losses, and emerge from this more determined and more dangerous than before. And to those people, I want to be very clear. You are dangerously, recklessly wrong. And I want to explain exactly why, because this is where the analysis gets complicated. And complicated is exactly where the mainstream media abandons you. When a military organization loses senior leadership, not one or two officers, but dozens of generals, the people who hold institutional knowledge, operational relationships, strategic judgment accumulated over careers. The degradation is not linear. It is not simply a matter of filling vacancies in an org chart. What you lose when you lose that level of leadership is irreplaceable in the short term. You lose the informal networks of trust and communication that are the actual connective tissue of a functioning command structure. You lose the nuanced understanding of ongoing operations that no briefing document can fully capture. You lose the ability to make rapid, sophisticated decisions under pressure, because the people who had the experience and the authority to make those decisions are gone. And you are left with subordinates who are suddenly operating in roles they were not fully prepared for, under conditions of unprecedented stress, with a political leadership, Netanyahu himself, that is in full panic mode and demanding aggressive, immediate action to demonstrate that Israel has not been broken. That combination, inexperienced commanders, a panicking political leader, and an adversary that has just demonstrated its ability to reach the very top of the Israeli military structure, is one of the most dangerous combinations in the entire catalog of strategic risk, because it is precisely under these conditions that wars escalate beyond any rational calculation of interest. It is precisely under these conditions that desperate, disproportionate, and ultimately self-defeating decisions get made. And it is precisely under these conditions that a regional conflict can metastasize into something that draws in powers and triggers consequences that no one, not in Tel Aviv, not in Washington, not in Tehran, fully anticipated or intended. You think you've heard the worst of it? You haven't, not even close, because there is a dimension to this story that virtually no one in the Western media is willing to discuss honestly. And it involves the role of the United States, the decisions made in Washington that led directly to this moment, and the catastrophic strategic exposure that America now faces as a direct consequence of those decisions. Let me be absolutely direct about something. The United States did not stumble into this conflict. Washington did not accidentally find itself entangled in a Middle East war with Iran. The decisions that brought us here were made deliberately by identifiable people based on a strategic framework that I watched develop over decades, and that I warned, along with other serious analysts who were systematically ignored, was built on false premises, wishful thinking, and a staggering underestimation of Iranian capability and Iranian will. Having served in military intelligence, I understand how intelligence gets politicized. I understand how the analytical process gets corrupted when policymakers have already decided what outcome they want and are simply looking for the intelligence community to provide the justification. I lived through that with Iraq. I watched it happen with Iran. And now we are all living through the consequences together. The American people, the Israeli people, the Iranian people, and frankly, every person on the planet whose economic stability depends on energy flowing freely through the Persian Gulf. Because here is the reality that no one in a position of authority in Washington wants to state plainly. The Persian Gulf, which carries somewhere between 20 and 30% of the world's traded oil, is now operationally contested in ways it has never been before in modern history. Iran has demonstrated through the course of this conflict that it can hold American naval assets at genuine risk, that American aircraft carrier battle groups, the centerpiece of American power projection for the last 80 years, cannot operate in the Persian Gulf with anything approaching the kind of freedom of maneuver they once enjoyed. The era of the carrier as the unchallengeable arbiter of regional military power is over. Not declining, not eroding, over. And the implications of that for American credibility, for American alliance commitments, for the entire architecture of American strategic relationships in the region are profound in ways that we are only beginning to understand. And that brings me to what I believe is the central strategic question of this entire crisis. A question that the killing of these Israeli generals has just made dramatically, urgently more pressing. Keep watching, because what I'm about to lay out in the next part of this analysis is where everything in this story starts to unravel. And I mean everything.